When I accepted my first job as a night nurse, I thought the hardest part would be getting used to the hours. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning that some patients don't always appear in the records, and that some hospital rooms have stories no one wants to tell. I worked in an old hospital built in the 70s. On the outside, it looked normal, but inside it was different. The hallways were too long. The lights flickered constantly, and at night the silence was so dense you could hear your own footsteps several meters after you'd walked. My shift was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The first week everything was normal, until I started noticing something. On the second floor, room 214, it was always closed. It didn't have a maintenance sign, it wasn't being renovated. Simply, no one ever went in. One night I asked a more experienced nurse, "What's up with that room?" She stopped writing. She looked at me for a few seconds and replied, "If you hear someone calling you from in there, don't answer." I thought it was a joke. I laughed. She didn't. The first time I heard something was on a Tuesday. It was 3:26 a.m. I was doing a round on the second floor. All the patients were asleep. When I passed in front of room 214, I heard a sound, a heart monitor, that constant beeping. I stopped because that room had no patients. I approached the door. The sound was clear. Beep, beep, beep. I opened the door slowly. The room was completely empty. The bed was made. There was no monitor, no wires, no one. But the sound was still there, coming from the bathroom. I opened the door, and the sound disappeared. The next day I checked the system. I thought maybe there was an error. But I found something strange. Room 214 did appear. It had a patient assigned, a woman named Laura M. Admission, November 12, 1998. Discharge, never. I stared at the screen. I asked administration. They told me that room hasn't existed for years. That night I decided to investigate. I looked for old files. I found Laura's story. She had been admitted for a neurological problem. After several weeks, she started saying strange things. She said someone was walking the halls, that a person sat beside her bed when everyone was asleep. The doctors thought they were hallucinations, until other patients started saying the same thing. Then something strange happened. One night, Laura disappeared. The room and window were closed. The door was locked from the outside, but she wasn't there. They never found an explanation. A week later, something happened that I still remember. I was checking medications when I heard my name. Matthias. I looked around. No one. I heard it again. Matthias. This time it came from room 214. I remembered what the nurse had told me. Don't answer. But I made the mistake of approaching. The door was open, and inside, someone was sitting on the bed. A woman, in an old hospital gown, staring at the wall. I said, "Ma'am, do you need help?" The woman slowly turned her head and said, "I'm not the one who needs to leave." The lights went out. For a few seconds, only the red light of the smoke detector remained. When they came back on, the room was empty. But on the bed, there was something. A medical folder with my name. I opened the folder. Inside were sheets with information about me, my date of birth, my address, my medical history, things no one at the hospital should have, but the worst was on the last page. It was a report. Date, 1 week in the future. Patient, me. Reason for admission, severe trauma after encounter, in room 214. That night I resigned. I didn't wait for the end of my shift. I left. I thought I would never go back to that place. But 2 days later, I received a call from the hospital. It was the old nurse. She asked me if I had entered the room. I told her yes. There was silence. Then she said, "Then she already saw you." I asked her what she was talking about. She replied, "Laura didn't disappear. The room was never hers." I went back to the hospital one last time to understand what was happening. The nurse took me to a basement I had never seen. There were old files, photos, documents, and a photo of the hospital during its construction. In the image, something impossible appeared. Room 214 was already built. Although it was officially added 20 years later, the nurse told me the truth. During a renovation, they found a sealed room behind a wall. Inside there was a bed, a monitor, and records of people who had never been patients, people who had seen something in that place, people who then began to disappear from the records. The hospital decided to close the room, but something continued to use it. Before leaving, I asked her something. "So, who was the woman I saw?" The nurse looked at me sadly. "I don't know." "Then why did she have my folder?" she replied. "Because that folder wasn't about you. It was about the next one who was going to see her." Years later, I still remember the last time I passed in front of that hospital. Room 214 no longer existed. They demolished it. But as I walked down the street, I saw something that made me stop. A window on the second floor, a room that wasn't on the blueprints, and behind them, glass, a person standing looking out. When she raised her hand to wave at me, I recognized the gown. It was the same one Laura wore, but there was something different. Now it had a name tag. Mine.